Okay, welcome to the Cinder part of the Xena virtual PTG. So we'll be meeting for the rest of the week from 1300 to 1600, I believe, but we have the room reserved till 1700, so we can go over a little bit if we want. Okay, just some general Cinder stuff, and I guess I should put this, all right, let me be organized. So I hope everybody's got a link to the Etherpad, but I should paste it into the chat just so it's there. Okay, so if you haven't been here before, the way we work is we've got this Etherpad, so it's a communal device that everybody can write into. So as we're going on, if you don't want to interrupt but you have a question, write it in the Etherpad. Jay has volunteered to take notes in the Etherpad as we go. If he makes a mistake or leaves something out, feel free to add it. So just go ahead and write stuff. One thing the foundation has asked, they want to keep attendance. Not sure why exactly, but they do. So if you could just put your name at the top of today's list around line 55 in the Etherpad, just so we have that. And if you could, oh good, everybody's picking different colors. And then the other thing is, with the color, we can sort of trace back to you if you left a question but didn't leave your name or something. So there's that. Okay, so just some general stuff for the Cinder project, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the PTG. So Rajat put a note on the agenda, but since this is coming up actually kind of fast, I want to emphasize it now. So stable train is going to go to extended maintenance mode on the 12th of May. So what that means for us is that we just released train maybe 2 weeks ago. But this is our last chance to do any releases from train. So please look at whether there anything that would be a good backport to train that hasn't been backported yet. I mean, our group's pretty good about keeping on top of that, but this will be the absolutely last chance. So just be aware of that, and please start making plans because I guess it's like 3 weeks away, actually. And then once it goes into extended maintenance mode, we can't do any more releases from it. We do have the opportunity to include patches, sort of as a courtesy to packagers who are still distributing train, but that's it. No more releases.
What was that date again, Brian?
So it's the 12th of May.
May 12th. Okay, I want to put it
Yeah.
into bed.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thanks. I should have. Let me scroll down. Okay. Right. So okay. Okay. We also have the RBD iSCSI client. So Walt's contribution from last cycle as part of the Ceph iSCSI driver, which has been reported to work with Ironic, which is kind of cool. But I had to do some quick revision of that patch. So just need somebody to take a look at it. It'd be good to release. We haven't done a release using the OpenStack tooling of that yet, and I'd like to do that before we have a critical bug fix or something where not that would ever happen, but just in case, so we're ready. So something that's just a patch to keep an eye on, please. Okay, and then I posted a patch with the Cinder specific events for the release schedule. It's pretty much the same as we've been doing the last couple of cycles. Only difference is I moved the spec freeze to 2 weeks after the R-18 mid-cycle. Let me put this in here. Because it's last time we had just 1 week, and that just wasn't enough for people to get comments from the mid-cycle and get reviews and get revisions and get stuff merged. I wound up giving a bunch of spec freeze exceptions. So I think it'll be just easier. Plus, there's not a holiday right around that time that interferes with this. So anyway, so keep that in mind. That'll be the date of the spec freeze. But if you look at the patch that's linked in the Etherpad, it's got, you can see the dates on there. So the mid-cycles, I would like to do what we've been doing and have them at R-18 and R-9. This seems to work really well. So what we've been doing, just to remind you, is we've been having the 2-hour meetings. That seems to be a good length. We can always, have a pop-up meeting or something if something happens. But anyway, what I'm thinking is we've sort of converged on some times that seem to work for this. So I'm wondering if we should just go ahead and set it. So what we've been doing the past few cycles is having the mid-cycle on the same day as the Cinder meeting and overlapping with one of those hours, because we figure everybody's got at least that 1 hour free or unscheduled. And then we just work around it. So I did not put those on the release. I didn't want to put too much Cinder stuff on the release schedule. Although I guess we could. But anyway, I didn't see, I took a quick look. KubeCon is the week of May 4th. PyCon USA is the week of May 12th. And EuroPython is the week of July 26th. And so none of those would interfere. None of those are R-18 or R-9. But please take a look at the dates, just in case there's anything I've missed that it would be good to change them for. So in addition to the dates that are on the release schedule, please hold the Wednesday for R-18 and R-9. And it'll be, we'll figure it out closer to the dates, but it'll overlap with the Cinder meeting time. I guess if we do it from 1300 to 1500, then we don't have to cancel the Bug Squad meeting. So maybe that would be a good thing. So I'll just tentatively propose now 1300 to 1500 for the Wednesday of those weeks, and check your schedules and let me know at some point. Okay. All right, and then just a couple of links I want to toss out there. So basically, I've just got a short thing. So if people ask you about the Cinder project, or if you're not clear yourself on everything we do and what our meetings are like and all that kind of stuff, that how to contribute page is pretty good. So that's a place to look. And it lays out our development. It's everything in one place. So if people ask you, they want to get involved in the project, I would point them to that, the Cinder info. And then the Cinder group info, just about all the core members we have, what groups we have. That's something you may be interested in. Okay, next thing, we're going to get some documentation help, hopefully. So we've got a volunteer, and she's agreed to start slowly it would be nice to get our whole entire documentation redone, but that's sort of a long-term thing. But she has agreed to start by just reviewing release notes on patches. So I'm just giving you a heads up. This is nice because as developers, we're not always right on top of things with writing clearly for normal people to read. So we'll have somebody looking those over. So anyway, if you start seeing -1s on your release notes, please be patient. but I think there'll be good corrections. So it'll be a good way for us to get some documentation people in here who have a different skill set who can help the project. And then just a note to everybody, everybody's been good about including release notes. Make sure you review the format we have. Gorka put up a patch early in the last cycle to try to standardize things, and it does make the release notes look a lot better and easy to read. So there's that. Okay, and then this week, Thursday is going to be Driver's Day. So I don't know if Fernando's here right now. I moved his driver-oriented thing from Friday to Thursday. So anyway, please check. Adam from... Oh, sorry.
Toledo. It's okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so just I just want you to be aware that your talk's been moved to, or your session's been moved to Thursday.
Okay, thanks.
Just so you know. Yeah, so Adam from Pure is going to talk about how they used Software Factory to set up their third-party CI. So please get the word out to other driver maintainers. If anyone has a suggestion, I don't know if I should just send something to the mailing list, especially the managers of people who maintain the drivers, because the CI systems are always kind of unstable, but they're actually at this breaking point where the ones that are Zool v2 or Jenkins based are going to be pretty much unsupported by any of the upstream stuff. So it would be good to get people to Zool v3, and the Software Factory distribution makes that easy, at least theoretically. So we'll find out from Adam how that worked in practice. But they got their stuff working.
Theoretically easy, Brian. Theoretically.
So it was theoretically easy, and hopefully Adam can share some experience that will make it practically easier for the other people to go through. But what I'd like to do is if we can get a small community of people using Software Factory, it should make it easier to maintain the third-party CIs, just in general, because everybody will be sort of on the same page instead of having roll your own stuff. But anyway, so Adam's going to be talking right at the beginning of Thursday, so please be on time for that, and spread the word to other driver maintainers or your managers or anybody who's involved with the third-party CIs. Okay, today we're going to have happy hour for the last hour of the PTG. The idea being we get to socialize first so we can more easily talk to each other later. I've noticed some of the other teams have been having retrospectives, which I'm not against, but I tried to do that one time with I don't know if you remember, it was like 2 or 3 cycles ago, with the I had these little surveys about what's going on in the project and what's going on for the drivers, and I got like 3 responses total. So that kind of turned me off doing that. But maybe during happy hour we could talk a little bit about stuff, but we'll see how that goes. Okay, just a few general things about the PTG. Everybody signed the code of conduct. I'm not really worried about that anyway, because we're all nice people. So make sure you add yourself each day to the attendance list, just so we can keep track of that. The foundation is doing that. The discussion will be flexible, so we'll pretty much go in this order. There's a few things that are noted in this schedule with definite times for cross-project things where we, have to coordinate. So those will have definite things. Otherwise, we'll pretty much just go through and discuss as much as stuff needs. And as I said, I'll move my topics around if I need to fill in or need to make space. And then, last thing, I said this earlier, just please use the Etherpad, take notes. You can see I stopped putting stuff in there, so thank you, Jay. But if you have questions or anything, go ahead and use that. And hopefully, I'm hoping Bluejeans works well. I was having a bad Zoom experience yesterday and couldn't hear anything for a couple of sessions and had to call in. So I'm hoping everybody can hear well. Otherwise, put notes in the Etherpad and we'll figure out what to do. I'm using Bluejeans just because the recording seems to work really well. But all that stuff's flexible. Okay, any questions or observations? I think that was everything I had to say about the project. So please review the releases patch just to see what the cycle dates are. And if I screwed anything up, please let me know. And away we go. Okay, so first thing on the list for today is, let me scroll down. Okay, so it's from Matt and Tom Barron. Some of you may know Tom as being a longtime Cinder contributor. I looked you up. You're in the top 25 of all-time Cinder committers, Tom. And Matt Booth has also contributed to Cinder. But they've got some things we need to do to interface better with Kubernetes. So I will shut up and let Tom and Matt talk.
I'll let Matt talk since he's the guy who has the need, and then Chip can.
Matt, I can't hear. Can anybody hear Matt?
No.
Nope.
Still nothing.
Hopefully now.
There we go.
Yeah, weird thing. Sometimes I was on the right microphone, but sometimes I've got to switch away from it and switch back, and that's a Bluejeans thing. So anyway, there you go. So yeah, Tom, keep me honest. We're running OpenShift on OpenStack. So this is OpenShift running as an unprivileged tenant workload on OpenStack. And one of the things we want to do is allow OpenShift users using Kubernetes to create volumes. And we want them to create volumes, to be able to create any volumes that the underlying storage will allow them to create. So thinking about purely block storage, we're using Cinder for volume backend, obviously on OpenStack. We want to allow the user to create single read writer or multi-read writer block volumes, depending on what's supported on the cloud that they're running on. The problem we've got at the moment is that we can't tell what the cloud can do. The only thing, so we can look at volume types, and we know what volume types are there, and what we can do is in Kubernetes we create a storage class corresponding to any volume types that the OpenStack user, that the tenant has access to. But we don't know in advance whether those volume types are going to create as a multi-attached volume or not, which means that if the user says to us, give me a multi-writer volume using the storage class, we can't reject that kind of at the API level. The only thing we can do is create the volume and then see if it had multi-attach set on it after we created it. So yeah, the request is, can we do better than that?
Hi, this is Gorka. Yeah, the thing is that this is a new case, let's say, because up to now, the idea of volume types is to hide from users any information from the actual storage, but this is kind of an exception because in this case, this is a feature that they need to know. So I think we would need a new API probably.
So
Can't you
if I
provide
could make a remark,
scheduler hints along with the request? Because the backends actually report and get volume stats whether they support multi-attach or not. And if there is a backend name specified in the volume type, you can associate that with that particular backend and then determine if that backend does support multi-attach directly. But if the volume type does not specify a backend name, then you can't obviously make that association.
but who is you here? A
Well-
regular user, the scheduler can pay attention to that. But a regular user, a member of a project, that isn't able to see those extra specs, even though the scheduler can. We talked about this, Eric and I were talking about this. We talked about this a long time ago in Cinder. And John Griffith really held the line that extra specs were always supposed to be hidden from regular users. He used to say things like, well, if a cloud administrator wants to expose that information, they can put the description in, they can put that information in the description of the volume type. So I could name a volume type like supports extra spec. Problem with that is that requires a human being. It's ad hoc. It requires somebody who knows what the description means to act on it. And Kubernetes is a perfect example of a programmatic application that ought to be able to have an API to make that kind of determination. Now, I'm not going to do the old Ben Schwartzlander, we did it and Manila Vendor should too or something, but we had a similar need, let's put it that way. And I'm not going to say what the right way for Cinder is to address it. But here, I'll put it in the chat and we can put it in the, and the Manila thing's by no means perfect the way it's done. But basically there's a distinction made among extra. First of all, there's the distinction, between extra specs that don't mean anything to the scheduler and don't mean only something to the back end, and those that do mean something to the scheduler. But put that aside from, like something that a driver might act on. And those are, of course, hidden from end users. But among the regular extra specs, the distinction between ones that show capabilities, which end users should be able to discover, and those that do not. So this is something I think you may want to consider, and whether you want to do it with extra specs or not. But as an example of the capabilities that are displayed to regular tenants, availability zones, that the back end where the volume class is available, share type, volume type, replication. We have different types of replication, none, or writable, readable, or DR. Different types of snapshot support. So with file systems, for example, you can do snapshots, and some of those snapshots are mountable with some backends and not with others. And some backends there exist only for creating a new volume share from the snapshot. So this type of capability is exposed. So you don't expose the back end. You don't say that it's Ceph. You don't say that it's NetApp. You don't say that it's SolidFire or something like that. You can expose that capabilities, which any can are free to implement. So I'm not saying Cinder should do this. It's an example, but I'm not here to tell Cinder. Despite having contributed in the past, have been away for a long time. But this was a need, and this is the way we addressed it on the Manila side to have an API or discoverable, machine discoverable way of handling capabilities.
Isn't the current way to be able to do this is just to create a volume type that has that extra spec specified in it with no volume backend name, and it can land on any backend that will support that?
How does the user
No, but-
know that that extra spec supports that capability? A regular
That's-
type.
I thought you said
That's
that
the
this is a
critical-
programmatic API, not a user.
Yeah, that's the critical point here. So this is a cloud. So this is your as somebody who's installing Kubernetes, I'm just a regular user. I don't. I have no privileged access on this cloud. I'm just a normal user. I get what I'm given, and if I'm given a volume type, then essentially that volume type may have the multi-attach extra spec set on it, but I don't know that. I can't see it, and neither can Kubernetes. So Kubernetes can't expose it to me as something that provides the multi-attach capability.
So
Yeah.
it sounds like there's so the multi-attach thing. I mean, we could address quickly by just exposing that in the volume type detail. It's like a Boolean or something, but it sounds like from what Tom's saying, this is probably like a tip of the iceberg kind of thing, and we should think about exposing the non-sensitive extra specs.
The problem we get with that, Brian, is that I've been using both Manila and Cinder recently, and these type of exposed extra specs tend to lead to a proliferation of volume types. So you end up with people creating hundreds and hundreds of volume types, depending on how many different types of common visible extra specs there are. You know, they end up creating their own specific volume type for what they want, and that can just lead to confusion along the line for the end users. They're just going to see loads and loads of volume types, and finding the right one is problematic. I've got like 10 on my Manila system, and I end up just creating it on the wrong one and wondering why my share hasn't been created.
Simon, I'd like to consult you on your Manila backend. I really don't think that's at all necessary.
Okay, maybe I completely misunderstood the way it's going.
I initially thought when I read the description and of the topic and the first introduction that we would only need this for multi-attach, but after hearing Tom, I realized that we need something more than just exposing the multi-attach feature, because for availability zones, we can also describe them in the volume types, and this is also something that users may want to see.
Yeah. So, hey, can you hear me on here?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
So I proposed an API for this 2 years ago at the Denver PTG to try to do what we're talking about here, because I think it would be useful for things other than multi-attach to be able to answer questions from a user of, can I create a volume that will do X? And there's some intricacies to figure out around whether it needs to focus more on backends or volume types and what exactly the best way is to map things out. But I did propose a spec to create an API to do exactly this 2 years ago. And I think it's a reasonable thing to do. That effort didn't go too far because the community at large was just not really sold on the concept, and I had other work to do, so it didn't really take off. But there's still a beginnings of a spec that's open in Garrett now. And that's mostly to say that I think it's a totally reasonable thing to do, because if you're using Cinder as the API, there's just things that you don't have any way to know that you probably should be able to figure out. And I don't,
Can you find a link to the spec?
Right, and
If I
to be
remember
clear,
correctly.
I'm not saying you shouldn't, doing it via API the way Eric's suggesting is satisfies the functional requirement we're talking about as well. So, and perhaps addresses Simon's concern if one were to do it with volume types. Even though I'd still like to consult with you, Simon, because I like talking to you.
Yeah, so there's not much in the spec other than the concept that I think we should do this because I didn't get around to writing a full spec after nobody was interested in it, basically. But
But my understanding of that spec was that it was really aimed at operators getting a coherent list. I mean, it's related, but I think it's slightly different, right?
One of the use cases was one of the what I thought would be a less controversial use case is the operator that says I want to create volume types, but I don't know what I can put in them that will actually do things on my deployment.
Right.
And to solve that use case, you really just need to deliver to operators what the extra specs are that actually affect drivers. So I think that was one of the primary use cases there. But the idea of can I get a multi-attach volume is a very similar kind of capabilities query. It may be more end user oriented, but it's kind of in the same area of pulling information out from specs on the back ends and providing it to a user.
Yeah, but there is a big difference between the two things.
Yeah.
One is can the backend do this? And the other is can the volume type do this? Because the users don't care if the backend can do it. If it has not been enabled by the operator in a volume type, it doesn't really matter. The only way to use it is something we are currently trying to deprecate.
That's what I was getting at with the question about volume types versus backends, because you have the inverse problem where just because the admin made a spec that said it can do multi-attach, that may work on some backends and not others, and it's not always obvious what the actual outcome is until you actually do it.
It could fail.
That's exactly what I was about to mention, is that the request to find out if a particular request is going to be able to do something is not necessarily deterministic, depending upon the current state of the request when it's made, right? Depending upon how many backends you have and what they're supported and all the filtering and weighing that's in place as well.
Well, it depends on what your requests are actually trying to ask. I mean, if the request is basically, is there any backend that will satisfy this that I could land on, then that might be sufficient. But it kind of depends on exactly what the case is that it's aiming to do.
And that's only helpful if when you actually make the provisioning request, you actually get that specific backend and guaranteed to get that backend.
Well, I think the question Eric is saying is, if we take out the equation in the filtering, the size, then can some backend satisfy this? Because the only limitation is on size. If one of them can do it and it's only a matter of size, then the answer is yes, you have a backend that can do that. Whether you can do it right now is different.
So the real question for the Kubernetes case is whether there's a volume type that will get you the required, in this case, multi-attach. Because in Kubernetes, what we're going to do is have a storage class corresponding to a volume type. So if the storage, if there's no, even if there are backends that have the capability, if there's no volume type that has that capability as an extra, I'm just going with the extra spec as a, I'm not arguing for doing it that way, but what's going to be visible to the end user who's deploying Kubernetes are storage classes. The storage classes are going to be created by this operator one-to-one with sender volume types. So the end user will see some of them that are ideally see some of them that are multi-attach capable, and say I can use those with raw block mode and do RWX. And it will see others that are not multi-attach capable because one or more backends behind them cannot do multi-attach, so the volume type cannot say that it has multi-attach. And they will say, no, I can only use traditional file mode with that and read write once or something like that.
How are those storage classes defined such that the end user knows that it is a multi-attach capable? Ignoring the problem of how we determine from the sender side.
The end user here is not the Kubernetes end user, it's the installer or operator. So the end user or the installer or operator, which is going to create storage classes and then allow different combinations of things. Matt, keep me honest here. Can see the sender volume types, but today it cannot see the extra specs associated, any of the extra specs associated or capabilities associated with that type.
Because they're not necessarily an admin with the sender deployment.
Yeah, in fact, they're typically not. They can be an admin, but you may have hundreds of OpenShift or Kubernetes clusters running on top of a single OpenStack deployment. That's the kind of vision. That's the typical thing. So the when you have shift on stack.
Yeah, just to add emphasis to that, I don't know of any instances at all where Kubernetes has admin privileges on OpenStack.
I know of some, but they're atypical. So as an example, a cloud deployer might have a public Kubernetes deployment that they do as well. So you take a public cloud, Vexhost or someplace like that. I'm just making one up, CityNet, inside Red Hat PSI. And they have an OpenStack deployment. The administrator of that cloud might Kubernetes or OpenStack deployment available to end users. But apart from that, that's the exception to the rule. The rule is that regular users rent OpenStack infrastructure as a storage and then go deploy Kubernetes on top of it. So that's what I do, for instance, on OpenStack clouds where I have no admin privileges.
Yeah, we use Vexhost. We use a bunch of clouds, but I'm gonna mention Vexhost because probably most people here know who Vexhost is. So we use Vexhost and as Red Hat, and we just create a cluster on Vexhost. And yeah, Mohammed, he doesn't trust us with admin privileges on his cloud. So yeah, we get what we pay for and nothing else.
It's analogous to running infrastructure from Amazon or Google Cloud Services or something, and then deploying Kubernetes on top of it yourself.
So you're not necessarily guaranteed that any backend would be able to service that request unless you had Eric's API, which said, hey, can any backend service this, create this type of a volume, not volume type, but.
Right, and the implications for sender or sender CSI pertain to whether you can use it in this newer raw block form, which is more like it's used in OpenStack, where you actually get a persistent volume that is like a sender volume, a block device, or whether you get something that has already had a node file system on it by the time you expose it to containers, in which case it's going to be dangerous to try to mount it on multiple nodes and so on. It will be mounted, not just attached. So it's an important distinction to be able to make in setting up a Kubernetes storage. I'm sorry, Gorka.
Yeah, I was thinking that the easiest way to do this is to allow some of the extra spec to be presented to any user, but I think that mechanism, even though it's easier to code, it's probably not very user-friendly, because what we would be presenting is something like extra spec, multi-attach, is true, things like that, which is not user-friendly. So something in the lines of what Eric was suggesting is probably the best approach, even if the feature is not check backends and only volume types. So, and that probably requires a bit more work. But I agree there is a need to be able to query in some way, either by volume type, specific volume type, this volume type do this, or make a ask which volume types can do this. One of those two would be necessary, and it could be a good thing to have.
Wouldn't it be easier to just alter the volume types list API to allow it to provide user-friendly extra specs? And then the person calling it and looking at each of those can decide and loop through the volume types that it gets back and does the matching that they want.
Yep, that could be it. Allowing the list to filter by a couple of things that users should be able to see it. That could provide a feature, and it could be an easy thing to implement. Yep.
I mean, we do something kind of sort of similar with the volume admin metadata. There's a couple keys that we allow to be exposed, even though that there's potentially many others, but this is something we allow end users to actually see. And this, I guess, would be the same kind of thing, or we can massage it so that way it's user consumable or something like that.
Mm-hmm. That one sounds good to me.
So from our point of view, in OpenShift, I guess it's not terribly important how nice the API is. It's obviously nice to have a good API, but from our point of view, as long as we can deterministically say this volume create will result in multi-attach or not in advance of doing that, then I suppose we don't really mind what the API looks like. We can code around anything.
Yeah, but since this is a feature that will be also useful for Cinder users, we want it to be kind of user-friendly in that. Yeah.
So in the OpenShift case, who is creating the volume type? Or is it the admin of the
Yeah, the cloud admin. That already exists.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, OpenShift has no control over the creation of volume types. It's just going to discover.
So would it be enough with Walter's suggestion to be able to list volume types available for the user that can do something? Filter by, they can do multi-attach, they can do this availability zone. Would that be enough?
I think it would be good to have a couple more examples of the kind of capabilities that we want to query other than just a multi-attach case. I mean, I'm thinking about backends that report that they can online extend volumes.
But that's for the administrator use case. This is for the user use case.
I don't think it is. a user could
Well,
very easily say, I want a volume that I can do an online extend on. That's kind of what I'm getting at. I don't know why that would just be an administrator case.
so you may have some gray cases, but I think multi-attach is a clear one. I think if you put availability zones in as extra specs, that could be quite useful for topology discovery. You don't have to agree on any of these particular cases. I'm just brainstorming about where you might need them or not. Volume replication is one that in Manila we find extremely useful to expose to end users, because they're not allowed to pick a particular backend, but they are allowed to say, I want to schedule on a backend that has replication capabilities. And in fact, we have different types of replication capability. So those are examples. I agree that you'd want to look at your extra specs, and my thought is on this, you err on the side of keeping them private until there's a compelling reason to make them available to end users. But you would have, if you did this, but you would have a mechanism where you can do that. Just Tom's opinion as an old Cinder guy, in every sensible.
Well, I mean, we could do something like with the resource filters, where we have make this configurable, which things get exposed. Otherwise, we're going to be doing like a series of like 500 micro versions to get everything we need out there.
I think if you want to do that, you still have to solve the problem that an admin doesn't have any way to know what fields actually do things without reading the driver code.
I'll put my John hat on for a second. That's why you write a really good description for the volume type, so people can understand what's in it.
No, but Eric is saying a different thing. It's not what in Eric's case is, yeah, you still have the problem for the administrator, even if that's the case, even if you have this feature, you still don't know a lot of things.
Yeah.
That's a problem that we have today, right? Is that they have to go look at the driver's documentation to find out what each of the fields potentially mean. I don't know.
And which ones are available for their specific backend? Because when a backend starts, you may discover that there's something that requires a specific firmware, a license, something like that. And as a Cinder administrator, you may have no idea about that. Yeah. And even worse, you may not even be the storage administrator. You may be just they may just give you credentials, a pool, and say this is what you use. So
dumb question though. Can't they just turn on debug and look at the scheduler log or the Cinder volume log and see what's being published?
They can get information from the pools that it's been reported, because the drivers report, but that's a bit of a mess.
I'm not arguing against the API. I'm just saying it doesn't seem a totally intractable problem.
That actually won't work, because it skips when you have code in the drivers that looks for a spec and does some behavior based on it. It doesn't show up anywhere in the scheduler log, because it's not known outside of the driver. And that was part of what, when I was trying to grasp at what a useful capabilities API would look like, part of what I had in mind was that we would find a kind of systematic way to have drivers be able to export knowledge about what fields they actually use for things, so that an admin could see that. Maybe
They can do it now. But
Yeah,
it's
don't
not
we have
easy
that
to
now?
know what the values. But
I
it's not, Eric is true. Eric
don't
is
think
right that it's not easy to know what you can
I
put in those fields.
I'm not sure that they can do it now. For some things, but I'm not sure they can do it now for something queryable at the API.
I have another question. What if, for example, I have a backend that supports multi-attach and I'm the administrator, but I do not want the users to be able to create a multi-attach. So if they query the backend and the backend says, sure, I can create a multi-attach volume, but what if I don't want to expose that availability?
Currently, I had a cursory look at the Cinder code, so I may well have misunderstood it. But currently, it's my understanding that you won't get a multi-attach volume unless multi-attach was specified as an extra spec in the volume type. So yeah, so it requires more than just support by the driver. It requires the operator to have given that permission to the user.
It also requires the Kubernetes administrator to have created an appropriate storage class.
Well, that's what we're talking about doing automatically. So we want to write an installer that just does that.
Answering Zach's question, that is currently we have part of the volume create API that kind of breaks this, and it's something we want to deprecate because you currently can override what the volume type says about multi-attach. You can just say, I want a multi-attach volume. So as long as the backend can do it, it will get done, even if the volume type does not specify. But the idea is to remove this feature. It's already been a warning in the logs as being deprecated. And the idea is to say what Matt said, which is basically the volume type dictates whether it's multi-attach or not, and it has to be explicitly allowed in the volume type.
Yeah, we did. Okay. I did note that in the code. I did see that was deprecated. So you'll be pleased to note in my write-up in the GitHub PR, I had already said we weren't going to do that. We weren't going to use that feature.
Nice. So for this use case, I think we can solve it with the filtering and enabling filtering via configuration option, and then a different topic, which is really useful for all our administrators, would be the extended API, a different API, which is the one Eric mentioned.
There's an API in the drivers that exists today. It's called init vendor properties, and it provides pretty darn close to what Eric is asking about in terms of what the vendor exports or can export, and it has descriptions about each of the fields that's human consumable. I just don't think we have an end-to-end API to pull that information out. I'm trying to find out where it's actually being used.
There's an API to see some of that information, but it is useless because it will tell you. I'm trying to remember because I sorted all this out.
The values. If I remember correctly, it's the values. You don't know what values you can put.
Yeah, it says something like, we're aware that there's a thing called compression, but it doesn't tell you if the driver says true or false as to whether it can actually do it. So it helps a little bit. It doesn't provide enough information to do what it's actually intended to do, as far as I can tell. It also is not universally used by drivers. When I looked at it, I wish I had studied up on that thing again for this week, but when I looked at it 2 years ago, I had pretty much concluded that it was not worth a whole lot. because it basically didn't really appear to do what it was hoping to do. There may be some room in there to improve things, but there was some pretty fundamental reasons that I kind of decided it was not interesting, and I don't remember at the moment what they were.
Well, it might be a good starting point because some of the drivers do implement it. And I'm wondering if the direction we should go on this is to go from outside in. So we have a small set of properties we want to expose now that we know about, like multi-attach, availability zone, a couple of things. So maybe the way to work this is instead of doing the API at the back end to figure out how to clearly state each of these things across drivers so that an operator gets a coherent description, we can just slowly add them to Eric's API.
I think there's details being glossed over here that I think we really need to kind of clear up before we get too far into that, because we keep talking about things that look at driver or backend capabilities, and we keep talking about other things that look at specs listed and volume types, and we keep making them sound like they're the same thing, but they're not. And I'm not sure that we can just interchange them and come up with a coherent idea of what it is we want to make, because it's not the same thing to have a driver reporting that it can do something versus a volume type spec that enables something. And we keep kind of flipping back and forth between those, but they're very different things. And whatever we want to do API wise has to have some coherent idea of which one it really wants to work with.
So for the use case,
that's why. I just want
the use
was going
case
to
that
say
Matt,
that. Go ahead, Tom. Yeah, I was just going to say that's why I was saying that we should do two different things. One is being able to filter the volume types, which gives the user thingy that Kubernetes and OpenShift need. And the other one is the one that helps operator know to actually know what they have, what they can do, and create proper volume types. And then maybe with those two information, we need later on to add a new one to allow what you were saying, Eric, a user to be able to know if a volume type can do an extend operation, online extend, and things like that, which is kind of a more advanced thing, which that is not containing the volume type itself, because it depends on the driver. So I think for this discussion, what we need, in my opinion, the solution would be the filtering of volume types and to allow operators to define if that is possible, which fields can be used, things like that. Or which fields are exposed better, because maybe they don't want to expose any of those fields, I don't know. But I think in those lines is where we should go to fix this current limitation.
Yeah, I think that the key thing
I
would
added
be
the original
to keep it flexible.
URL for the commit for the init vendor properties that describes why it was added, FYI, since it somewhat pertains to this conversation a little bit. It's in the Etherpad. But it's been in there for 6 years.
That API, if you run it, will also tell you that compression is a field on clouds where it's not a field. Because it says every cloud says it has compression. It doesn't.
Yeah, I see that. So that kind of smells like this is a problem with that particular API and backend's not really honoring it. And if that's the case, then maybe that's just a bug that we need to file and get people to report whether they support compression or not. So that way this API can be consistent, or because that seems broken in and of itself, which is a different problem. But it sort of looks like it's something that could turn into what Erica's kind of asking for if we modify it or make it a requirement to implement, or it's something to look at, because otherwise this API, like you said, isn't very useful as it is. And if nobody's using it, then why do we have it?
Well, it could be made useful for the case of the admin wanting to be able to create volume types. I'm not sure it's as useful for the end user questions.
Yeah, but I think we can keep those separate. I mean, they're related, but we'll have.
So yeah, I'm fine keeping stuff separate, but what I kind of would like to, I'd kind of like to have some idea of how, Gorka's proposal for filtering on the extra spec stuff is good. I just want to make sure we're not gonna think we have two good ideas, but find out later they don't really fit together very well because we didn't actually sort out what it was we wanted to make. And I'm not saying we have to design a whole API today, but
No, I understand that. I think, right, because you don't want to dig the tunnel from two ends and then not meet in the middle. On the other hand, I mean, I think we've all agreed that the capabilities API is a great idea, but I think it's kind of overwhelming about designing it and.
Well, I would be happy to kind of hash out the design further as spec work, but at the Denver PTG, people did not think it was a great idea. And numerous people told me that we didn't need it because we already had all this stuff that solved the problem.
Yeah,
so
I guess
if we get
I
back,
thought it was a great idea.
well, if we get back to where we want to actually pursue it, then I'm happy to kind of pick that up and run with it. That's why it's still out there, because I was intending to do that eventually. But it got kind of unstrung the first time around.
I think we do sort of kind of piecemeal have the ability to do this. If you're an admin, there are parts and pieces that you can cobble together to figure this stuff out, but not as a coherent, hey, what can Cinder do for me given these volume types, and how does that associate with the capabilities for each of the volume types? Because John's answer of, well, just write a good description is not helpful for anybody that's trying to programmatically discover what is useful and what Cinder can do. And unless you have admin privileges, there's no way to determine that.
One of the use cases that people had in mind for this many years ago was that if you think about like a user who's logged in doing stuff with Horizon, if we pretend we're in a world where Horizon supports more Cinder features than it does currently, if you have this, you can use it to turn on and off capabilities in the interface and gray out things you can't do versus letting people just try to do things and watching them fail and that kind of thing. So it's there's some usability interest there for anybody who's doing interface kind of work as well.
Yeah, that ties into the idea that I had like 7 or 8 years ago of creating a way to validate extra specs as you're creating volume types to make sure that the backends can support it. And
right,
because it's kind of ridiculous that we don't have any kind of usability features like that allows admins to programmatically interact with configuring Cinder and how they want to use it, other than config files and whatnot. But
Yeah.
I think this is a good idea, Eric.
Yeah,
You took your hat off.
Yes, it's off.
Well, maybe I'll take a medium-term action from here to just go refresh some spec work with more current thought on that whole direction. See where we might want to take that.
Who wants to, well, let me ask you, would that include the end user facing part also, or do we need another person to take that action?
Well, I think the part that I'm interested in updating is the capabilities API for the user, which is not actually any of the stuff that people wanted here today for this current topic. So I'm not sure who is on that part.
So let me ask this: what do you need for this? If there were to be provisional agreement, at least that it's sane to move ahead with the idea of exposing some extra specs to end users when they show volume types or list extra specs, instead of hiding them. Do you need a spec for that? Do you need?
Yeah, we'll need a spec. I'd like to see what this would look like, whether it would show up in the volume type detail, I guess, is where it would show up, independently of the actual specs.
Right. So currently, an admin shows volume type detail, or I think even lists extra specs, and they see multi-attach, yes or no. End user gives the same command. I'm just expressing it from the CLI level rather than the curl call or whatever, rest, and they don't see it. I think if they make the underlying curl call for the extra spec, they get a forbidden.
Right.
So presumably you want some flag or something added to the extra specs.
Well, see, I don't know.
Around which that policy could turn, or your idea was maybe to have it more flexible and everything's controlled by some kind of policy.
Well, it's just because, right, we've got to, there are definitely stuff exposed in the extra specs we don't want end users to see. So we know that, and then there's stuff we do. So we can either do some kind of weird filtering in the extra specs, but then we have the thing Gorka brought up, which is that our extra specs language is a little bizarre and may not be useful for end users. So I guess that's the first question would just be that, whether, just a subset of the current extra specs response is fine, or whether we need something different.
It satisfies the use case that Matt and I bring, even though, there's a little bit of a danger of feature creep here, and Eric's discussion was very useful for bringing up the whole range of related questions here. But for the core use case, if I can call it that, because it's automation that's being supported. So what is friendly or unfriendly? The description that John Griffith talked about might be the most friendly thing for a human being, but it doesn't work at all for the automation case. And in the automation case, you can just list all the volume types and then look at the extra specs and the volume types, and that is one way to satisfy that use case. They're either there or not in the volume type. So it's not unfriendly at that level. I'm not arguing at all that the extra specs language may not be something that could be improved for human end users or Horizon or something like that. I'm just a little bit worried about adding on complexity to deal with perceived future needs that may or may not materialize. I don't know. I'm just putting it out there.
It
Yeah, I
almost
guess
seems like we're discussing two separate problems to an extent with respect to asking, Cinder, given the current volume types that are out there, the current deployed backends, what can they do versus how can I create a volume type and what the backends are support? Because those aren't necessarily the same thing. And how this discussion started, if I remember, is that Kubernetes wants to find out what you support right now. I want to create a multi-attachable volume. How can I find out which volume type supports that so that way I can do that and create something that the Kubernetes end users can use?
Yeah, so I think, so to get back to Tom's issue, I don't want to control this by a policy because we want the API to be queryable and not have to worry about that kind of stuff. So I guess what I'd like to, so when we need a micro version, I think we want this to be displayed as part of the volume type. But I also think we need to make it configurable which of the extra specs show up. Well, that may be incompatible with what I said about that. I guess I'm kind of policy shy at the moment, so I'd rather have no policy impact on this, right? So,
yeah, I mean,
if you look at the if you look at the admin metadata, there is a very defined dictionary in the API that allows, I think, 2 specific keys to be copied out of the admin metadata and into the volume metadata as a return response for volumes themselves. It's crazy simple. There's only 2 that it's allowed. And so if we want to expose just the multi-attach ability, if we know that volume type is tied to a specific backend, then that mechanism would work. If it isn't tied to a specific backend, then you can't necessarily say that it does unless all of the backends have that same capability and support that. So I don't know how to make that work in all cases.
But Walt, aren't you already, or an admin can already look at volume types and without any inspection of backends?
The Cinder admin can see volume type, and everything, yes.
Right. So without having to worry about the backends or worry about whether the volume type is set up correctly by the cloud administrator, that's an important problem. But in having a volume type already that says multi-attach is supported, the cloud administrator is making an assertion. You will get multi-attach. You will get a multi-attach backend if you use this volume type. That's all the Kubernetes user needs. He's not double checking that the cloud administrator has set up the volume types correctly or anything like that. That's an important problem. And the discovery stuff that Eric's talking about could help cloud administrators do the right thing.
That's
but
a different
right now,
problem.
Yeah, right now all we need to know is that the cloud administrator says this volume type supports multi-attach.
And that is true if and only if that volume type is tied to a specific backend and or all the backends that volume type could land on support multi-attach.
That may be true if and only if that, but that's none of my business as a regular user. What's my business is that the cloud administrator has made a contract with me. If I use this volume type, I will get such and such capability. Okay, he may not honor that contract, whatever. All I care about is the public side of that. That public side is available to an administrator today, but not to a regular user.
Yes.
So I'm just suggesting that public side be made for this
Exposed.
extra spec exposed, and then you may decide some others might be exposed either at the same time or in the future. We could think about it now, but we have one clear example of something that I think most of us agree regular users ought to be able to find out.
Yes, I agree with you. I guess I'm getting into the details of how you determine whether a particular volume type actually supports it or not, because you could have multiple backends deployed, and if there is no volume backend name specified, it's really not deterministic which one you're going to land on.
But you know for a fact that if the volume type, if the volume type says that you want it to be
Yes.
Able to do multi-attach, it will only land on a backend that can do multi-attach, which is what all that Tom cares about.
Correct.
Right. There's no guarantee that it will actually succeed in creation. Might run out of space. I mean, there are all kinds of things that could go wrong. So we're not giving that kind of assurance. We're just giving the assurance that this is what you asked for. Any more than you asked for a Nova flavor of a certain size or whatever.
The case that I was talking about was specifically if you did not specify that extra spec in the actual volume type, because you could still get a volume that supports that depending upon which backend you land on. And the time that you're asking, hey, can I get a multi-attached volume? Maybe is the only answer you can get in that case.
No, because with the volume type code that we have, the volume has a field which is multi-attach, and that field is filled on creation. And how we fill that is based on the volume type. So if the volume type does not explicitly says it multi-attach is allowed, then the volume, even if it lands on a backend that can do multi-attach, that volume will not be able to do multi-attach. This was part of the implementation because since it's block volume, we were all afraid that somebody would start multi-attaching volumes and corrupting data everywhere.
Gotcha. Yep. Okay, so I forgot that aspect of it. It has to actually be an extra spec specified in the type for you to ever have that applied at provisioning time. So then, yes, we could expose this through the same mechanism that we do with the volume admin metadata, which is if it's there and it's allowed in that dictionary as one of the allowable keys, then just report that specifically back. That's the short-term easy fix that we can provide for that particular key.
Yeah, I think what we do is just microversion, we'll define it as a JSON object, and then the initial key value pair is going to be multi-attach. And then we define it generally enough, we can add other stuff in there without having to change the API.
We expose all those extra specs for an admin, so we just would have to say, well, for this particular key, even if you're not an admin, expose this one if it's there.
Right. And then we'll have to decide, in what way we want this to be configurable or not.
Yeah, I think that would be fantastic for my use case.
Okay, so do you or Tom want to take a crack at a spec for this?
I don't think I want to write a Cinder spec.
Oh, come on, it's easy. And we got a documentation person to help you. She doesn't know that yet, but that could be.
Matt, why don't we co-author something?
You can slap it up and just give me a draft or something. I can work on it with you. But I'd rather you guys know your use case.
And we can lean on Brian and others, Walt, whatever, for advice on the actual implementation. But I think we could start with problem statement and dummy in something about the put a straw man proposal in there so people can correct it.
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
Yeah, I'm cool with that.
What's the spec deadline? Just remind us.
So the spec freeze is, what did I say? It's like 2 weeks after R minus 18, so R minus 16.
Okay, R minus 16. Okay. And I'm moving to part time, so I have lots of free time to work on the spec. So.
I thought you were going to say
No, I'll put. I was going to say the opposite, but I think we could. I can help rough out something.
Yeah,
I've
I
written
can help
lots of
too.
lots of specs that never merged.
Well, we don't want that to happen.
Just
Very
joking.
cool. Okay, thanks. Any observations or follow up or? So Eric's API is not necessary for this, but I still emphasize I think it's a good idea. And I want everyone to join with me in affirming that.
Well, I'll go resuscitate that spec and try to get more of the whole idea in there, because I think that spec ended up being the minimal, smallest, thing to propose at the time, but there was a lot of ideas being discussed that didn't really make it in there. So I can go get that going again for no real particularly targeted timeline, but in the not too distant future.
But I think this is good because it's helpful in that it gives some more focus from this being a really good thing for operators to have to something that's almost necessary at this point. Because like with Walt's point, they're going to be writing these volume types. We don't know if they'll ever land anywhere if they're not accurate. So I think this use case may actually help. But anyway, that's my sense. Okay. All right, we've got the interoperability working group coming in, I believe, in 3 minutes. All right, so we'll talk about. All right, so thanks, Tom and Matt, and we'll look forward
Thank
to
you.
seeing your.
It's been fantastic. Thank you.
Hey, feel free to stick around at happy hour at 1500 if you.
I have a beer fridge here.
All right.
But,
Okay.
I have to drop for another session. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks much.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks.
Right. So we got 2 minutes. Well, maybe we should just take a break and then pick up with the interoperability working group. I'll move. So we got. I'm assuming my status is going to take more than 2 minutes.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So let's. All right. I'll move that. I'll find a place for that, and then API v2. We want it to happen, so I'll talk to you a bit about that tomorrow or Thursday or Friday, because I've got a bit more strategy in mind this time. Hi, Arcady. All right, I guess. So how long have we been going for? This is good because we're at, okay. The Bluejeans recordings are limited to 2 hours and then they automatically restart a new one. But that should be fine because we'll be done at 2 hours. Okay. Arcady, I don't know if you've seen the link to our Etherpad. Let me put that in the chat. Okay, so Arcadi's here to talk about the interoperability working group. I think you're the chair now, is that right? I think you're muted also.
Better? Can you hear me now?
Ah, perfect.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Surprised by that? Okay. Yes, I do have Etherpad, but I haven't put anything there yet. But I can go over that. Basically, just kind of high-level reminder. So, as a part of the OpenStack Logo program, we have interoperability program. And then any of the vendors, public cloud, private cloud, and so on, are capable of running the tests which interoperability working group defines for portability of the applications. There is the way it's structured right now is that we have what I would call, for lack of a better name, the core functionality. Or actually, let me share a few things. Maybe I can.
Yeah, I may have to stop sharing the Etherpad, so let me do that.
Okay. Yeah. Second to find out. Where? Yeah, that I'm not able to share and review at the same time.
Oh yeah, that's a limitation of this device, is that if you share, you can't see yourself.
Yeah, because I have the open thing and I cannot. Okay, so I guess the only thing I can share the second screen. Give me a second. Not even do that. Man. Second, and I will move the screen.
Okay, we can see your
Sure.
desktop.
Okay, so this is what I want to share then. Better. So this is basically how we are governed. That's going through the major innovation right now, but it's less relevant. What is relevant that we define the guidelines, and the real interest to us is a guideline which we are creating for the next guidelines. The guidelines cover three releases going backwards, and usually supposed to be applicable to one release going forward. So the last guidelines which we came out with was 2020-11, which was for Usuri and goes back to, so it covers Victoria and train. And technically it covers Wallaby when Wallaby comes out. And the new one which we are coming out covers from Wallaby backwards. And presumably when it comes out, it will also be able to cover Xena. So there are two things which I wanted to kind of walk you through. So here are the coverage which we have for Glance as a required as a required functionality. So for storage, so here are the storage APIs which are currently covered. So it covers creation and deletion of the volumes as a required functionality. And here are the list of the specific Tempest tests which are covered by that. And all of those tests must be passed in order for the cloud to be getting OpenStack logo as a compliant implementation. That means that the application written to those APIs are portable across the clouds which have the certification or the marketplace listing for that. So the volume creation and deletion, that's relatively straightforward. Snapshot creation, the get operation. I guess we'll, at some point of time, the V2 have to be dropped, so I need to find out when the V2 APIs are no longer supported, so we'll deprecate them. And
Patty, just
yep.
I'm not sure that we're seeing what you want on the screen.
Yeah, I think you drug it off the screen.
Okay. Okay. You see
We
that
are
now?
currently.
Yep. There we go. Yeah, and if you can like really boost the.
I can do that.
Okay, that'd be great.
And let me. One second, I need to. Is this visible?
Still very small.
Tell you what, is that
Arkady, we are seeing the whole screen, so it's not a problem with where you put the window, is that we are seeing the whole screen, and you're probably using 4K, so
yes.
It is really, really small when we
so the problem is that I'm not able to share that window and at the same time display it, which is.
Yeah, you can just probably, I think with Control and Plus, you increase the size of the letters of the font, and that should be enough.
Okay. Let me.
There we go.
Better?
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you, guys. So that's get the next one. Again, those are all of the specific Tempest tests. So everything is run through the Tempest. The update operation, copy image to volume, clone, availability zone, extension, which I'm not 100% sure to what degree we really, I mean, there's only one test for extension. And then metadata, getting the metadata. So the real question to me, I mean, those are all details, and I'm happy to put this file into this. Oh yeah, you already put it there. Okay. the real question to me are the kind of threefold. One is what are the major changes in Wallaby with respect to the functionality? That means that potentially we'll need to add something for a required test or maybe advisory test if they are not ready for major consumption, but we expect them to be, required functionality in the future. So that's the first question. The second question, is there any functionality which is considered, deprecated or removed, so we can remove those set of APIs out? And the third one, which I really want to spend more time discussing, is how do we want to handle the micro version of the APIs? So right now, most of the people who are submitting their results, cloud vendors submitting their results, are using the RefStack, and the RefStack client basically does auto negotiation with the cloud of what microversion it is supporting, and then uses that microversion. Easy enough. Well, it is easy enough with respect to submission, but probably not good enough with respect to the customers to ensure their application is portable because they might be dependent on the specific microversion. So that is topic of the hot discussion within our working group, how to handle it, not just for Cinder, but for other projects. And we wanted to kind of hear what's your opinion and what your advice of how best to handle that. So maybe start with a simple one. The first one is, what are the major changes, if any, which are impacting the API? Not the functionality.
Yeah, so Wallaby, we have two. We've just exposed two new elements in the volume detail response. But
okay,
I don't know that those are...
It does not seem to be, should be required functionality, but maybe advisory functionality.
Yeah, I guess I don't know how to ask this. There's also this issue. So some of our microversions have policies associated with them that control whether you'll actually be successful using that microversion. So I don't know how those would probably be the kind of things we would not expect people to expose, because presumably we introduced a policy because there was some kind of controversy about exposing that information.
When you say policy, you mean under RBAC policy, who are the users who are capable of extracting the data?
Yeah.
So by definition, I think all of the tasks which are running are supposed to be run as a user, not as administrator, even though there are some scenarios where we need to set up things as administrator first before running.
Right.
That's have been kind of the ingrained already into the way how it's run. So the other possible way to look at that is that if there is specific Tempest test which covers that new functionality, then we can have the functionality not changed, but as an advisory as advisory test, add those and then collect the feedback from the users and the clouds of them using that type of API, and then based upon that, that Tempest results coming back, how many people using it, then we will, that functionality specifically, we will know, if it was inclusion for the guidelines in the future and when.
Okay, so basically, if we write a Tempest test for any functionality we think should be included, we could propose it, you would consider it advisory, then you
collect we collect the data to see how, how many clouds and users are using it, and then based upon that, decide when to promote it. So that's kind of the way it operates. The ref stack we are relying on the ref stack. So ref stack has two capabilities. One, of course, running any of the tests, including all of the tests for the interoperability. But it allows a collection of the data in two ways. It allows a collection, basically any of the users and the vendors to submit their results both for marketplace, so we can grant them the logo, and those are direct submission to the foundation through the ref stack. And the other one is basically as people run their stuff, they can submit what results are they getting. So that kind of creates a cumulative knowledge of what tests are what functionality is being used, and that goes into the weight on the APIs for promotion them from the required to advisory to, like 4 grades which we have. And that's why you will see that, there's sections which are kind of required section here, and then there is an advisory section, and there is, I don't remember what was the other. There is deprecated section, of course, and there is a removed section. So, follow the normal process. We deprecate once it's, not being, it's planned to be deprecated, planned to be removed, and then, removed similar to, the functionality which is done in all of the other projects.
Okay, so I think right now the Tempest tests that are included are basically the 3.0 micro version, so real basic stuff.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, so okay. So I guess your question to us is there any new functionality that would be considered a requirement and not a enhance? See, a lot of the microversion changes have been to make things more friendly to operators or to users, but I don't know that we have. I mean, and then we have things like the attachments API is probably tested indirectly by the compute tests that attach volumes.
Well, yeah, that's attach and detach are there. So volume attach and detach are part of the coverage, and they're part of the compute, and they're required tests too. They have been required since the beginning. I did not explicitly mention them. They're, they're there. To be fair, they're part of the compute less of a Cinder because there is Nova APIs. And they're required, and I'm not aware of any changes happening to those APIs.
Okay, so what you're looking for, the kind of thing, I mean, this is just summarize what you said. All right, you're looking for the kind of thing that would affect workload portability.
Exactly. And specifically, and usually we look at that from 2 angles. One is there changes of the APIs, which are being, changes in the APIs for the users to use, because that directly impacts the portability. And second, more from the testing perspective, if there is changes in the Tempest, which being used to test those APIs, so maybe the API does not have a change, but the Tempest test, was discovered that there was some, problem, and then additional Tempest testing were added or deleted or modified. So we wanted to flag those appropriate as part of our coverage, especially if since the same test, the same guidelines can be used against multiple version of the multiple releases if it's applicable to one release, but we know that we'll need to have a different, that at least one Tempest test should not be run against previous generation of the release, or you will have to have a specific micro version specified there, and maybe kind of the bound, max, and min micro versions of the APIs. That would be kind of the information which will help us to define the coverage, the test coverage properly. And I think the first thing, kind of maybe the easiest one is, we shared that next.json file. So that is kind of what we tentatively, basically we took what we had before and kind of massaged it a little bit and say, okay, this is what we think we're gonna consider for the next guidelines. But now we are interlocking with every project and asking them, does that make sense, or there is some specific changes you'd like us to do, either with respect to the APIs or with respect to the Tempest test which we use for testing those APIs.
Okay, and then one, you may have already addressed this. There used to be something about a capability had to be advisory for a certain number of cycles before it could become required. Is that still the case?
Well, the new capability goes to advisory for at least one cycle before it can become required. And that because we cannot require something until the clouds provide that functionality and ensure it's working. So advisory basically gives them heads up that this is something we're considering for the future, and please ensure that you test and validate that functionality. And also it gives an opportunity for the users to use that and see if that fills their need.
Okay, and I guess the other thing is, so with the portability stuff, right? So if I'm connected to a Wallaby cloud, I have access to more micro versions than a Victoria cloud. So,
absolutely.
Right. So does that mean we can't include any kind of Wallaby?
We can, but we need to be. So this is one of the discussion which we have inside the working group.
Okay.
So what we are contemplating that while we are covering all of the things, the multiple releases, we might want to specify max and min of the micro versions of the APIs for each. And then say, okay, here is one, here is one, here is one. If you really want it to be portable across all three of them, then you take the overlap. That's easy. If you don't care about it, you basically want to make sure that your specific version, the micro version you're using, is across all of them. Then this is the one we need to test. But if we are including the min and max for each release, then we are capable of providing the guidance to the users what is portable and what is not, and that's the main goal.
Okay, so from our point of view, I guess, as the Cinder project, right, we're interested in whether we've implemented anything that if somebody wasn't running it, it would be a disaster.
Basically, it will break them because of the changes. Yeah. I would assume that we have a backward compatibility as long as you specify the micro version, then you will that and it will be okay. As long as it's above the minimal version of the micro version of the API which the release is supporting. I don't know what rules you have in place in terms of how long the micro version is being supported before the sliding window moves to the right.
Yeah, I don't know that we have a policy about that yet. We're still interested in getting rid of V2. So we have to keep
Understandable.
we have to keep 3.0 around for a while longer.
Understandable.
Yeah.
Okay. So for now, we are kind of testing this 3.0 kind of from historical reasons, but we do want it to move to the micro versions, but as I said, we don't know how to handle it yet. That's the discussion we have. We'll have a similar discussion with Nova. We'll have a similar discussion with Neutron, and trying to kind of collect the data and come up with a proposal how to handle that for the future ones. I think for this, for the upcoming guidelines, I think we are okay of staying for Cinder for 3.0. I think the Wallaby still supports it, so it should not be a problem with respect to portability. But at some point in time, we do want to figure out how to handle microversions across all of the projects. And one other, it's kind of more informational. So we have what I call the base things, which are here, but also we have the add-on programs, which are not on this document. Okay. So basically, we have 3 add-on projects: one for designate for DNS, one for heat for orchestration, and one for Manila for shared file system. So those are add-on. They're not they're not required functionality to get the logo of OpenStack. But if you are claiming that you are supporting that you are supporting that project, then here is the guidelines you should follow so that application which you're using then are portable. Besides the base projects which are part of the platform, which basically includes the core, those are the only 3 which we currently have. There is always ask for add more, but we are collecting the data from the users what are of more interest to them. And there are some things which we considered, but they're harder to do. For example, ironic is a little bit trickier for us to handle with respect to the users, because in many cases they're using that as part of the setting up the cloud. So not as a user ones. HPC guys do use it, but there are more exceptions to the rule. But in general, we are concentrating on those the core functionality, because those are the primary things people are asking us for. So one other thing to mention, so we are planning to change how we operate as an interrupt working group. The board basically decided that the interrupt working group is mature enough, so does not need to approval of all the guidelines going to the board every time. And the board also now open infrastructure board and not open stack board, so they have other things to worry about. So the plan of record, and I'm writing the full process proposal, so for us to present it, that we are expecting that only the process changes for how we operate will go onto the board, but individual guidelines will go for the approval for the interrupt working group, for the ref stack, because this is what people are using to test it and run it, and it needs to be able to support any of the functionality changes happening. The foundation representative who are running the marketplace, and the TC board, TC committee. Well, it used to be TC and UC, but now it merged together into one, so it will be just the TC. So they look at the overall test structure and to ensure that meeting the criteria. So I think they will be the one who will be most interested of how we're going to handle the microversions. So in other words, the technical representation will be there, and without approval of all of those 4 entities, the new guidelines will not be approved. And that's part of the process which I'm writing on right now, but at the same time, we need to ensure the new guidelines comes out.
All right, thanks. All right, I think it gives us a pretty good idea of what's happening with the interoperability working group these days. Okay. Yeah, we'll have to think about whether there's anything in between 3.0 and 3.64 that we should submit as advisory.
Okay. So I'll, let time to think. I mean, we can connect back, next week or a week after, and kind of review it in more, specific details. If any of the changes you wanted to do, meanwhile, you can look at what is in this file
Okay.
for coverage.
All right, great.
Perfect.
Right. Thanks.
Thank you, and appreciate your time, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So, okay, you can stick around. It's happy hour now. So, I'm going to stop the recording now.